because I've been told that's something that I should be pursuing even in high school, but it wasn't something that really interests me. It's not that acting doesn't interest me, it's that I find that I can use that better in comedic delivery than actually reading someone's script.
Welcome to the Downing Cut. Today's guest is Lee Dancy. Began his media journey at just 11 years old, interning for the Air Force's radio and TV station while his father was stationed at Wakanai Air Station. From film and photography to running a company, Shed Multimedia Studios, and opening an award-winning gallery in Seattle, Lee's diverse career continues today with his latest venture, Sample Seattle. Welcome to the Downing Cut, Lee. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. And after an introduction like that, I should be paying you and not being interviewed.
It's my specialty, man.
You
I
do
got to
good.
treat the guests good, you know?
You do good.
So, Lee, now you've been in the film. Now, we saw each other at the Seattle Summit.
Mhm.
And tell me what your integration is with the Seattle Summit. How
All right.
are you
So
involved?
here's a long story short. I'm usually an outsider, but a few years ago, a good friend of mine who was a local actor passed away while he was on set for his second breakthrough. Uh, this person, we all know he was a local favorite. He's Australian. I'm trying not to use his name because I'll tear up. Anyway,
Paul. Yeah.
because, and I'll just say his name, I have to, you won't know who he is. Paul Einhorn. When Paul basically passed, I had to go do something that was going to be in honor of him. So that was the first time I ever decided to go to one of the film summits, and it was in his honor I went. And so that's how come I started going to film summits, because of Paul.
Wow. Now you did. My wife Caitlin said something like she thought that you did some of the editing of the interviews there.
Oh yeah, I did. That is one of my many fortes is editing, and you never know when you're going to see a Lee cut somewhere, because the idea is if you can tell it's me, then I haven't done a good job.
Did you just say Lee cut?
Yep, I said a Lee cut.
That sounds like a good YouTube channel to me. Lee
Oh,
cut.
well, there you go. It's not trademark, and you're a pretty enterprising person. Go for it, Joe. Go for it.
Oh no, for you, my friend.
Oh no, I've got enough going on my plate. If my plate was any fuller, I wouldn't be able to eat. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, with your experience in the community and doing video and seeing films,
Right.
I want to know. I asked all my guests this, and I think it's important. Are you an actor yourself?
And I did that because I've been told that's something that I should be pursuing even in high school, but it wasn't something that really interests me. It's not that acting doesn't interest me, it's that I find that I can use that better in comedic delivery than actually reading someone's script, or I should be very honest, I'm more of a writer, and I don't know of anybody that words I would want to read more than my own. That's kind of selfish, but welcome to the real world.
Yeah, well, the reason why I asked you is because I always ask my guests this.
Mhm.
I want to know from your opinion, from your perspective,
Right.
from the friendships you have with other actors, what makes a good actor?
I'm going to say some things that people are not going to like. Tragedy.
Good.
Hardship. Bad upbringing. I haven't said anything yet that's positive, and that's usually, if you look at most of the better actors, I don't know about your history, Joe, and I don't want to delve into it, but most of the better comedians, most of the better actors, they can channel that angst, that fear, that anger, anything that you can think of that could have happened to somebody out of their control in the youth. They channel that into their art. For instance, one of the best actor/comedians, and his pain was obvious, and it's what brought him to an end, Robin Williams.
Yep. So you're telling me that in order to be a good actor, you got to have a really crappy background.
I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just the way I have noticed that, if I talk to someone and they're really not someone whose parents have given them the silver spoon and to send them to all of the best schools, given them all the best coaching and all of that. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who have to go on interviews, who, well, you know what I'm talking about, Joe. People who have to struggle, scrape, and have
Yes.
to get rejected over and over and have the courage to go back after rejection and keep doing this. Those people could only do that if they've had that sort of experience rubbed into them in their life. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that makes sense because you can really tap into your struggles if you're playing a character that's flawed. Obviously, we're all flawed, and if the
Exactly.
more flaws we've experienced, the better we can in tapping into that emotional
Mm-hmm.
content. So, tell me about Shed Media has been the intersection of creative storytelling, advocacy. How do you ensure the films and projects produced by Shed Media not only entertain but also drive a meaningful conversation around issues they address?
Well, the only way you can do that is being selective in the materials in which you use, how you approach the projects. For instance, when I say we, that's usually the royal I, because I'm like an octopus. I'm running all sorts of things thanks to modern technology. But we aren't after quantity, we're after quality. For instance, right now, there are two stories that we've been working on for over a year and a half for one and 2 years for the other. And if we're lucky, in the next 2 years or so, both of those stories will be finished. But that shows you the sort of things we'll go through for a major project. Now, little minor things like blips, 5 minute things, 3 or 4 minute films, those are my hobby fancies. So every once in a while, if I have like, a hair up my butt, for instance, thanks to COVID, we couldn't go anywhere and I couldn't shoot any films. So we went to Cancun, and I was so happy that I made two shorts just on the trip to Cancun, just because it was the first time I could go somewhere, take a camera, because that's my thing. If you see me, even if it's not with just my phone, I've almost always got a camera on me. I've lived with cameras since I was a kid, and they are an integral part of my life, not just for storytelling, but for archiving and documentary.
Yeah. Yeah. What now you're a photographer as well.
Yes.
Do you also include or any kind of do I mean the typical the word is slideshow, but I don't want to use that because it sounds so mundane. But do you make
Not
any kind of
anymore. No, no.
photography
In the beginning,
films or anything?
before I don't want to cut you off, but in the beginning, before there was a possibility for have a 16 millimeter camera or doing anything like that, I was already doing slideshows. Again, most people may not see it in my face, but I'm 66 years old, so I've lived through a few incarnations of media. Okay. And when I was a
Yes.
young kid, it was every household that had a slide projector. And about every weekend or two, you would have a little party at your house, and somebody would bring theirs over, or you would have yours, and you would narrate what it was. So I grew up with that sort of environment. And so I was taking pictures a lot of times for my folks so I could have, well, we're going to have a party. We need to, okay, go. And I'll just get up black and whites, whatever else. Hey, what did Lee shoot this time? That boy is very interesting. He's different, but he's interesting. And that's how I got started, just kind of as a service to others.
Wow, that's great. But that kind of leads in my next question is with the digital media as it evolves and innovative strategies come to play,
Mhm.
how do you stay relevant and impactful in the increasing saturation of this media landscape?
Well, if you're lucky enough to catch the top of the wave when this media first got started back in 1989 or 80, and you're lucky enough to be in Germany and working for one of the first companies that produced digital video and digital audio, and you're one of the A and B testers, and you're the guy who translated everything from German to English, then you figure out how to stay on top of it. And since those heady days, that has been my forte. I can remember when people said, Lee, 16-bit sound, brother, the clipping. How are you? Yeah, and they were right. They were right. And time, it got better. And the same thing with the video quality. Oh my God, Lee, when you're shooting this digital stuff, the quality is not as good as. And then within 3 or 4 years, all of a sudden, what did I hear? Oh, Lee, the quality of shooting with these cameras is so superior to shooting with normal cameras. Why would you do that? People just keep riding the train. They don't drive it, they just ride it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I mean, even I saw reports lately with the latest iPhone, and they were breaking down the specs, and it said it was 48 megapixels, and they're like, it's really not 48 mega,
Mhm.
yada yada yada, into that tech world of going, well, is it
Right.
really this or is it really that? How's the quality? Uh, How do you work on a variety of projects across different platforms? And then how do you determine which stories or causes are worth pursuing? And how do you tailor your creative approach to fit the medium and audiences for each project?
Oh, well, that was a whole lot for me to unpack. So let me start from the beginning. It really depends on what type of project it is. The first thing, if it's a project for someone else and it's a project that I can speak about, you got to do a lot of corrections. And that's work that you do for people and you just don't talk about what you get paid well for. So if it's not a corrections project, if it's someone who walks in off the street and says, Lee, I'm going to be doing a speech and I need this, that, and the other. First thing I'll ask them is, what do you understand about digital audio? Well, I don't understand a lot. I said, okay, well, let me walk you through this. First thing, if it's voice only needs 8-bit sound. No more, no less. But now the dynamics come into play when you start putting instrumentation into it. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to deliver a project for film that's a minimum of, that's the magic word you said, 48 is the magic word, because that is the level of sound, the minimum level of sound you can deliver. Now, with the high-tech industry going today, we can deliver sound in the category of not kilohertz, but megahertz. So I recorded my studio at 1.6 to 1.9 megahertz, which is better than 2-inch tape. We're finally past doing
Wow.
anything analog that can be looked at and said, oh, analog is better. In the opinion of warmth and what people like, maybe so, but technically speaking, no.
Yeah.
Now to go on with it, yeah, see, you have a long one, so I had to take a pause to catch my breath. So to go on, with the next part of that question, could you remind me of the next part? Because I got into this first
Yeah.
part, which is a technical thing, which I love, and then I lost sight of the second part of the question.
Well, yeah. How do you determine which stories or causes are worth pursuing? And then how do you tailor your creative approach to fit the medium and the audience for each project?
Okay. First, you have to understand your environment. The way I would approach projects would be different if I lived in LA, if I lived in Atlanta, if I lived in Chicago. Now, most people listening to me are not going to understand why it makes a significant difference in those places versus here. And I'm going to tell you why it makes a difference. Here, if you're not a person of Caucasian persuasion, your chances of getting where you're going and telling stories that you want to tell and getting the funding that you'd like to get to tell those stories are severely limited. Hence, that's why Shed Media has always been totally independent. It's never taken any money from state, city, or anyone else. And of course, being an executive producer, what's the adage? Go find the money. And so I will go find the money for good projects. I will sit down and I will network with people who I believe in the project and have the same agenda. And here's the big thing, the same agenda as the people who are trying to tell the story. And not, hello, yeah, I love your agenda, but now I'm changing everything.
Right. Yeah. Have you come across that?
Oh, well, I live in Seattle. That's why I started out with that way. I live in Seattle. So yes, it's a
That's a
pretty common,
default.
yeah,
Yes.
as default, that's how it works here.
How long have you been in Seattle?
This time, I came back to Seattle in 1997. I had been in Seattle prior to that from 1980 to about 1981 and a half. I came up here. The idea was I was going to go back to school at UW. That never happened. I took a job instead, and I became the first manager of color at a Denny's restaurant. And the restaurant they put me in was a Burien. And back in those days, Burien was mostly Mormon, Caucasian, and they had just moved into the Section 8 housing over in White Center, the boat people from Vietnam. So that was way back then. And then
What
I
year
went
was
from
that?
there in 80 to 81 to be the first black manager of a Denny's restaurant in Portland, Oregon.
Wow. Holy smokes.
Yeah. I've had a pretty interesting life. When I write my bio, I've had a life that's more interesting than the writers of uh, uh, was it Forrest Gump? I've had a Forrest Gump type of life. I've been in places and met people that I shouldn't meet and shouldn't have been, but just the way my life has worked out. And so
Yeah.
again, as with the film philosophy, I say this: I can't control what other people do. I can only control what comes out of my studios, and that means a lot of things that could make me money won't be coming out of my studio.
Yeah.
I live in Seattle.
Yeah. I was trying to teach my 4-year-old that you can't control what other people do. You know,
Well, she's going to
that's the
learn it.
key.
She's got a good dad, so she's going to learn it from example.
Yeah. So, Lee, as a filmmaker and director, how do you ensure that the message in your projects resonate with both everyday citizens, policymakers, and what role do you see storytelling playing in the shape of Washington's future?
All right, let's start with the last, Washington's future. Washington's future is locked, and not in a good way. If it were a more equitable place than the real stories of Washington State, which really are based more on people of color than you would believe. In fact, the guy who first moved into Western Washington was a guy named George Washington who was half black and half Irish. And you know, in America, you got a drop of black blood, use black. And so he was the first guy here. You never hear of that story. Centralia, first settler there was a black guy. You very rarely hear of those stories. Now, I don't even want to talk about Bruce Lee or Quincy Jones, or I can go down the list. We had a joke in the community. When I first got here in 1980, I would hang out mostly in the black community because back in those days, Seattle was a pretty segregated town. And the Central District was black. And as a military kid, I could live anywhere I wanted. So I lived on Queen Anne Hill. But I would go get my hair done, go talk to folks. And this was the conversation of the time. This is a town for mediocre white boys. White boy mediocre gets off elevator, doesn't break his leg. Front page news. Black man saves world. Page 5, small print. Seattle.
Yeah.
And it may be funny, but actually it is true. Seattle is a very odd place. And it's not just because of the color of being black. It's just the color. You'll have problems no matter if you're Asian, black, Native American, Hispanic. It's a club that is trying to be exclusive and can't be. And that is the rub on the city of Seattle. It doesn't want to change, but it has to change. So to answer your question on that again, until things change, you can't tell real stories in Seattle. If you think I'm kidding, they got a ton of money for PBS about 5 years ago to tell the story of Washington State. That was the most whitewashed story I have ever seen in my entire life.
Really?
Seriously, really. And I'm not joking
Wow.
about that. That's when the funny goes out. I'm not joking about
Yeah.
that. You know, that's what you'll face here. I meet a lot of very talented people of color here, and most of them are transitioning out of here, going other places to Atlanta, Chicago, LA. That's why I started with those 3 cities in the beginning. We just lost a nanny sitter, and she was only doing that because she was trying to find a real job. She had a master's degree. She was Hispanic. She could speak 3 languages, but she couldn't get hired here. So she did what I suggested she do. Said, you know, you're pretty bright. You come from the Midwest. You should probably look back there. So within 4 weeks, she had a high-paying job in Chicago. And she's now gone. So we lost another creative person, another person that could have helped Washington State be more of what it should be. And nobody even noticed. And that's the problem. Nobody even notices here when that happens.
Well, speaking of Washington State, you've been involved in a variety of creative projects.
Mhm.
How do you approach storytelling differently when it comes to the political and economic cause, such as the work with More Money for Washington State PAC?
Okay. So I live in a state that had God's grace. And people will go, what's even God's grace? Is this guy talking religion? No, we were able to bring people here to shoot films organically. And nothing works here unless it's organic. As soon as our neighbors to the north saw what we were doing, they were very smart and worked very hard to come up with a way that they could get a share of the pie. And so they came up with this great thing called the tax credit. And even though it was right next door and we could see what it was doing, we had the same sort of people who run this place. No, people will come here. We don't need a tax credit. Oh no, that's just a stupid idea. No, we're not going to go for that. So here we are 20 plus years later with our small neighbor, Oregon, with a bigger budget. With our neighbor to the north with a budget that's so big that's ridiculous. And so at one time, I decided to try to see what I could do to help out. So I put together with my friend Rick Deskins, and I know you know who Rick Deskins is. We tried on our own to try to recruit and get people to understand what the problem was. Spent my own money, rented space out at Westlake, did all of that. And how much support did I get from the actual film community? None. Because this, again, is Seattle. And if it hadn't been a person of color doing that whole thing, it would have gone much better. This, again, is Seattle. And we're going to have these problems until we can get some of the people that are still gatekeepers to find another gate to keep someplace else.
What year was that when you started?
What was this? This is about 5 years ago, 6 years. This is, I think it was 2016, 2017 that I did this. It's still up. All the paperwork and everything is up online. You don't ever, it doesn't ever go anywhere. I think it was 2016. I could probably go look at my timeline, but I think it was 2016 or 2017 when I was doing this. It was years back. And then I saw
And you
what everyone else sees, that, you can carry the flag as long as you got the strength to carry it. You're not going to get a lot of support and help you carry it. And I really appreciated Rick's help, because Rick was out there. Every time I was out there, Rick was out there with me, representing actors and whatever else. And I was representing the sound guys and the people on the other side of the line, as we say, below and above. And I was
yeah,
representing the below
yeah.
the line folks. But no, we got no traction on that, and we won't get any traction. Look, I hate to be the guy who brings bad news, but the history is we spend a whole lot of time, a whole lot of money trying to get Boys in a Boat made here. We even passed a law to get Boys in a Boat made here because we can't get any other movies made here. But that wasn't enough, and we didn't do it right. And then, Joe, can you tell me if Boys on the Boat was made in Seattle, Washington State?
Doesn't ring a bell.
No, it was made in England. They came here and did some of the publicity after that was done. And of course, because the story was here, we were mentioned, but they thought the conditions of Seattle didn't meet how it was back. In other words, tax credits, even though they wrote everything in, because I can't think of any other movie that's ever been written into a state's constitution to get money for. So the evidence is still there. And that didn't work.
Interesting.
I don't want to be a negative Nelly, but I do my thing because I know that it's lip service here. You can't tell me, with all the smart, creative people we have, that 20 years we're still sitting at, what is it, $14.5 million, and that includes salaries and every other thing underneath the sun? Am I wrong on that figure? Is that figure higher? Am I off on that? I think it's
I have no
14.
idea.
I don't think it's more than 14. And I think we're lucky because it used to be 3.2.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that's the politics of the area. We get some really nice people. They get the great jobs. For instance, our first city director for film was a really cool guy, but his job was film and music, and he knew nothing about music. So he concentrated mostly on film. When we had a regime change and he was pushed aside and they brought someone else, the person they was brought in, didn't know a thing about film and only knew everything about music. So she did what most people do here, learning on the job. So after she worked for the city for a while and the city couldn't use her anymore, now she's got a great position over with the county, and she's still learning. I have not yet seen a credible actor or musician placed in a high position where they make those decisions, where they can greenlight anything in the state.
Right.
And so that is why there is shed media. That is why I am selective. That is why I do work with the BIPOC community, advising and editing and anything I can do to help young talent get stories out, because stories here are important. And the native stories here are super important. And you would think where we were at, you'd have a native story every week coming out.
Let's talk about documentaries.
Mhm.
Usually, documentaries are there to kind of change the perceptions and inspire action.
Mhm.
What impact do you have and hope that your documentary, whether I know you said you're working on a few, I have an American Dream, will have on its viewers and on the public discourse in Washington? How does that kind of all come?
For instance, the documentary that I'm working on right now is Where I Was Born, and it's about race. Because when I'm anywhere in the world, one of the first questions I get from almost anybody, I don't care where they come from, they look at me and go, "Where are you from?" And I know what they're asking me. And I usually play along and go, "What do you mean, where am I from?" Well,
Yeah.
What country are you from? Oh, I'm from America. What country are your people from? They're from America too. Uh, what are you? Well, and that's the story of where I was born. I'm a Malungan, and the Malungan people are one of the first mixed race people of the Americas from the 1600s. They are almost equivalent. They're not a native group, but they're as equivalent to a native group as you can get. The only other group that comes close are the Geechees of South Carolina, or the African slaves that were never intermixed with whites and lived in South Carolina. They're their own people. They speak a lot their own tongue, which is mostly West Indian. The people of which I'm from have kept themselves basically quiet. Those that were black considered themselves black. Those that were white passed for white, because for the longest time with our race relations and our race laws, you didn't go around telling anybody what you were unless you lived in the hills, where most of the Malungans still live. And those that live in the hills don't have any problem identifying as Malungan. In fact, before my wife ever met me, she met Malungans when she was living in Nashville, North Carolina, because a lot of them live in North Carolina. That's where my people are from too. And my folks, great grandfather, the Butlers, moved from the hills, moved to central North Carolina to Sampson County, and that's where they lived until they all passed off. And there aren't any more Butlers there. There's only still 10 acres of Butler land, and that Malungan land is mine. I have it, I keep it, and it's going to stay in the family because it's family land. And everybody else figured, oh, I'll get some good money for it. It's okay. You got a few $1,000s, and now what do you have? It's gone. The land is there.
Yeah.
If I ever need anything, I can live on the land. So yeah, that's the story is basically about my family, the Butlers, and getting people introduced to Malungans, and some people that are Malungans that are white people know of, and are Tom Hanks. He's a Malungan. Elvis Presley was one. I can't remember which president. It was one of our presidents was a Malungan too. But yeah, and there are a lot of other black Malungans that have done stuff in state and everything else. But yeah, the Malungan people have one little credo. Their kids can be from very dark to very light. And the one thing that, if you were a true Malungan, and I don't know why I have it, because I could only be a quarter Malungan, but I have it regardless. And that's that little knot at the back of the base of your skull. They call it the Malungan knot. So it's a bump at the base of your skull. So if you've got that, that's the mark of a Malungan. You know, man, what's back there? I ain't got no mark. Yeah. And for years, I didn't know what that was. So why do I have a bump? And so doing my research for this movie, I found out who I was, where I was born, is the name of the movie because of that, and about the Malungans. And North Carolina is very much on subject, because in North Carolina, there were only two races of people up until about maybe 60 years ago. And you were either white or you were Negro. So if you were Chinese, you were Negro. If you were Mexican, you were Negro. I'm not kidding. You were Negro. There were only two races, and that's why all the natives were considered black. Everybody was either black or white. That's how base it was in North Carolina. Now, that sweet little state doesn't like talking about that, but the history's there. You don't have to talk about it. You can read about it. And it was many censuses before it was different races for the longest time. And that's why in North Carolina, you go look at the black population of North Carolina. It's a very unusual black population, because you have strands of every group that's not white and whites in the group of the North Carolinian blacks. And some of them are Malungans too, like my mother's folks, or my mother's folks. That's a better way of saying it. So that's what this story is about.
That's really interesting.
It's about Malungans and those people. And the other story is about jazz, because jazz is in the family history. Didn't know that either. Got to be careful about what you ask, because you might find out who you are and not know it for many years. So anyway, the second story is one closer to heart. It's a small jazz club that I discovered back in 1984 when I made my first trip to Amsterdam when I was living and working in Germany. And it was this little long, looked like it'd be a Soho dive. And it was smoky, it was loud, and it was fantastic. And I made it my headquarters every time I was back. Even if I was there just for a visit, and if I wasn't there doing anything else for more than a few days, I was at the Alto Jazz Cafe. And I usually had a preferred place to sit. The third table from the front, because that's where the sound, I'm a sound guy, that's where the sound was good, because you weren't right on top of the speakers, right? And above that place, there was a picture of who? Thelonious Monk playing piano because he, like all other musicians who come to Amsterdam, because he was there doing a live performance in, I think, 62 or 63, he played this club. And for years, I would, that was my spot. I felt comfortable there. I had good energy there. And then I found out when I was 61 years old from a long lost cousin. Why? Because I'm a cousin of Thelonious Monk. My grandfather was his uncle. So there you go. So this,
Your grandfather was
yep, my
his
grandfather
uncle.
was the uncle of Thelonious Monk. And I'm the spitting image, as I've been told, of my grandfather. Yeah. And
That's
so
great.
that's I didn't even know, who I was. And as I say to people all the time, boy, if I'd have known that my name was Monk, doors would have been kicked open when I was a young man. But by the time I figured out who I was already there. So what can you say? You can be
Yeah.
grateful. And it does say that genetics do hold true, because even without knowing who I am or my background, I basically follow genetically that same background.
Yeah. That's fascinating. When can we see the
When I
documentary?
can get around to
What's the
finishing the
process?
documentary. And that's always with documentary. People go, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
man, no, it'll be in a month or two. Let me tell you, most people that I know, if they're lucky, their documentaries come out 2 or 3 years. They shoot 1 year, they think about it, how they're going to edit it, how they're going to write it. And then the next year, they start putting the piecework together. Well, the good thing is we got AI now, so I can knock a year off thanks to AI. I can write, and AI can correct my writing. And editing, I can edit, and I can look at what an AI can edit faster, and I can go through, because AI for me is a tool. I'll see what AI did. If I don't like it, I'll go back, pull what AI did, redo it, do whatever else. It's like, oh, wait, all you got to do is hit that button, and the machine will do it for you. No, it won't do it for you. We're not at that stage yet. You still got to have skills. You still got to know what you're doing, and you still have to
Right.
be good at what you're doing. And so those are the two docs that we discussed. Now, the doc that you were bringing up was the hospitality doc, and that was a long time ago. This one that I worked in conjunction with the PBS and with the University of Washington State, and that was about hospitality industry. And basically speaking, something I knew about, because I got my first hustle on working in like restaurants at the Officers Club at the Air Force Base. And then I learned how to run a restaurant when I was in college, working at the IHOP in Lubbock, Texas. In fact, the guy who owns that IHOP still does. He's the biggest franchisor for all the IHOPs in the U.S. I believe he owns a quarter of all the IHOPs now. His name is Joe Caden. Yeah, I think
Wow.
he owns a quarter of all the IHOPs in the U.S. And so he was a pretty good mentor and taught me a lot about the business. And from there, of course, I went to Denny's. And then after Denny's, I wound up back working for Joe in Boulder, because Joe opened up a new place in 1982 in Boulder. So I left Portland and went to Boulder, worked for him about 6 months, and then I said, you know what? I got to do something better than this. So I started working in hotel kitchens so I could get my skill sets up, because I really am interested in cooking and food and not just running restaurants and doing the paperwork. So that gave me a chance to learn how to do really high end stuff, and brought back the memories of me working in the kitchen at the Officers Club, because they aren't serving no slop to the officers. They eat well. They eat very well.
I got it already. Lee's Cuts YouTube channel about cooking.
Hey, there you go. You come to my house. The one thing you'll
That's it,
find
man.
out, that's the southern part of me. You come to my house, I want to know when you're coming so I can give you some food. Even if it's leftovers. Oh, wait,
Yeah.
this is great stuff. Wow, you cook? No, bro, that was from 3 days ago. What the heck? No, bro, it's about cooking. My kitchen is my laboratory. You come to my house and you look in my kitchen, it looks like a galley on a ship's kitchen. Everything from a fryer to air fryer to anything you can think of that you could use, I probably have in my possession, and at any given time is using. When you come to my house for a party, yes, I even have chafing dishes, just like at the restaurant.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Let's put the media stuff on
Okay.
the side a little bit. Have you ever thought of opening a restaurant?
Yes and no. Yes, I have thought about it, but I have been in the business long enough to know that if I open a restaurant, I'll have to divorce my wife and get rid of my kids.
Fair enough.
And if you've
Fair
ever run
enough.
a restaurant, anyone's run a restaurant, just saying, oh, he's not lying. He's not lying. Because it's a
Yeah.
full-time
Yeah.
effort between figuring out what your menus are going to be, keeping your place clean, keeping your staff honest. The back door is where a lot of
Mm,
merchandise go out of. Keeping your staff honest, keeping your customers happy,
really?
giving the right environment, that is around the clock. It really is. And that's why it was good when I was working in the restaurants, because I had that service forte to be able to put people at ease and understand what their needs were and how to address those needs. And that's why I did well in the business. And as my wife goes, yeah, we're just happy
Yeah.
that he cooks here at home, because pretty much any night I'll figure out what I want to make. And if it's one of those things, and we got something in the house, for instance, when we buy our food, we buy our meat from a local source. So I'll go to a butcher, and I've already had that butcher have a contract with the farmer that I bought the sheep from, or the cow from, and that's how I get my meat. If I go get
Nice.
fresh
Yeah.
fruits, I like going up to Skagit County because they have the best berries up there, and buying in bulk and bringing it back and freezing it. I do enjoy having good food, and I do enjoy cooking, but I don't have the love of cooking enough to where I would give up my family. I love my family more. How's that? I love my family much more.
That's
Much more. There
yes,
we go.
that's a good
Much more.
choice. What about media?
Media is media. That's the great thing about being in this technological super age, where you can be a one-man operation, and if nobody's watching you, they would think you're a team of 15 or 20. There's no movie that
Yeah.
I shoot that I have anybody as the sound guy. I'm the sound guy. If I'm doing camera work, believe me, I'm propping cameras, using cameras, putting cameras all over the place, trying to get shots. B-roll, my life is Mr. B-roll. Everywhere I'm going, I'm rolling B-roll. Don't know how I'm going to use it, but know I'm going to need it. Writing, I do my own writing. Compositions, well, if you start looking around here, you'll see a few instruments or two. So I do my own compositions, and I used to be a member and on the board at the Seattle's Composers Alliance years back when I was into that. There's a few places I've been, a few things that I've done over my 66 years. Now I'm pretty much not into committees anymore. I've found that I can work better and move quicker on my own than I can as a group.
Yeah, you don't have any gatekeepers
There
to
you
slow
go.
you down. It seems like it's becoming the common theme in everywhere that I've been in the corporate world. There's always gatekeepers, and you just can't get
Well, this is
stuff
the Lee
done.
philosophy. I have two ways of doing it. I'm either going to cut a hole in your fence or build a ladder over it, but I'm coming in.
Yeah,
You ain't stopping me. I'm
yeah,
coming in. And I'm coming in because I have the right to be there.
yeah.
If you've got talent, you've got stories to tell, no one should stop you from being able to come tell your stories. Maybe no one will watch your stories. Maybe no one will listen to your stories, but you should have the right to tell them and to make them.
Tell me about Sample Seattle.
Okay, Sample Seattle is something that is a new project. It's a love of mine now. When I was a kid, before I knew who I was, and before I knew that I was a monk, we were always being visited when we were overseas by USO shows. And if you don't know what a USO show is, go look up a guy named Bob Hope. You'll get all you need to know about USO shows. So those shows weren't just one shows, they were a series of shows that would go to different areas. And because we were an isolated military outpost, quasi military outpost, in reality, I can say what it was. It was a spy base. We're on a spy base. So on that spy base, they had to have entertainment, and the USO would bring a show, and it would come to our base theater. After the show was over with, all of the entertainers were at my parents' house. So I was lighting cigarettes, pouring drinks, hearing stories,
Wow.
sucking all this stuff up, not knowing I would ever use this stuff, just thinking this was great. And so one day I go, you know what? The one thing that I haven't seen in a while and we don't have anymore is a variety show. Okay. Yeah. And one thing we have in Seattle is an abundance of high end talent not getting paid well because we have too much talent. So I thought, what if I could put a road show together and take it someplace where people don't have that much talent and would love it? And so the idea was to put together this Sample Seattle and take it to Alaska. Take it to Anchorage first, then to Fairbanks. And after it was established, then go to Kenai, go to even maybe Nome. But get into that place where people still love live music and want to have it. So we have what? So many people with Grammys around here that you could probably hit them in the head with, and nobody's eating on those Grammys. Just because you got a Grammy doesn't mean all of a sudden you're driving a Maserati and living in a $5 million home. You just got a Grammy. That's all you got was the Grammy. So
Right.
a lot of these guys have
Yeah.
Grammys and awards, but they're not getting any money because the local market doesn't support the journeyman musicians. If you're a brand new person, you can get a gig easy. If you are a person who's statured, you're not playing locally anyway. For instance, Dave Matthews may live here, but Dave ain't playing here. I bring up Dave because Dave is a family friend through my wife. They know each other. Her oldest child and his child went to school together. So he's not making any money here. Aaron Jones was a new kid that most people here don't even know of. Again, it's that color thing. He's the new Jimi Hendrix. And if you go to Paris, if you go to Germany and mention Aaron Jones, they're flipped over that kid because he got out of here because of financial backing and they took him someplace to develop. The Seattle thing, you're not getting here. You're not getting anywhere here. You would think for as much as Sir Mix-a-Lot has done for Seattle with Baby Got Back, has put them on the map, there'd be a Sir Mix-a-Lot festival, concert or something. No, there's not even a Jimi Hendrix festival or concert. But now, if you were to ask somebody if we could do a Kurt Cobain festival or concert, watch the reaction. Watch how fast people jump in. He's not even from here. He's from Grays Harbor.
I think Bremerton we renamed was it Quincy Square?
Because that's where everybody's pops worked at. They all took the boat. There were two reasons for the boat. Okay. Why do we have a boat to go to Bremerton so often? It was to take the workers over to the shipyards to work, and it was to bring the naval personnel over to the pier for the hookers. Because up until about 1979, 1980, your fish throwing market where all those people are getting those fish thrown, they weren't going down to getting no fish them days because every building around them was a hoe house. That was Seattle. And that is why the boat traveled the way it did. And that is, if you watch a movie called Cinderella Liberty, it'll clue you in. Because Cinderella Liberty was, it was supposedly about the Seattle area, and he was supposedly over Bremerton, taking the kid on his last liberty before he had to go to jail because he did something stupid. And it was all about Seattle and the waterfront here. And that is why, for the longest time, until about 1980, so they tried to clean things up. And that's when they pushed them out to where? The Pack Highway. And they were out of the Pack Highway in the airport for about 10 or 15 years until, we got to clean it up. It's the airport. And then now we all know where they're at now. Go up Aurora Avenue. That's where they're at now. That's their new home. That's where they got finally pushed to. That's the Seattle saga. Hate to say it. I know a lot about Seattle, good and bad.
I'm pretty naive when it comes to history. I don't know why.
Well, maybe it hasn't been presented in such a way that was fascinating. I went to school and I was lucky because about every year, lucky or unlucky, however you look at it, about every different year of school, I was going to a different school thanks to my dad being in the military. So I had the ability to have sometimes good teachers and sometimes bad teachers. And I got to be able to understand the difference between the two. And it was a good thing that I was autodidactic because if I wasn't an autodidact, I don't know where I'd be in this world. Do you know what an autodidact is? Oh, okay.
No,
autodidacts are people who can pretty much teach themselves anything. They learn. They spend all their time learning. And so for tech world, for me, for an autodidact, that's like putting me in a warm tub and giving me a little rubber ducky. I'm happy.
When it comes to music, did you teach yourself?
Yes, I did. In fact, I taught myself above the objections of my mother. Even though my first concert I went to when I was 6 years old, 1965, November 11th. It was notable. That's why I remember it. It was the Apollo Theater. And my mom and I took a cab from Queensbridge, because that's where my grandma lived, from Queensbridge up over into Harlem to the theater, better known as the Apollo Theater. And we were a minute in line. Somebody took us out of line, brought us up to one of the mezzanine seats. We were just Mama and me set. We watched the James Brown review. And when the James Brown review was over with, Mama and I were escorted back to meet Mr. Brown. I got to shake his hand, got to talk to him, I got an autograph. I never knew, never understood what did I do, win the Kitty Lotto or something? Then once I understood who I was, that I was actually royalty, then it made sense. Because I remember in the cab ride over, my mom said, my cousin set this up. And I don't know cousins from Schmuzzin. So I thought, some female cousin. No, it was her cousin Thelonious Monk who had set it up. So that was the one thing that my cousin did for me without knowing he did something for me. That was the greatest thing he ever did. And when I saw James Brown, you can forget about it. I knew I was doing music. And Mama goes, well, you're going to do music, boy. You're going to have to pay for your own instruments, pay for your own lessons. And that's how it was. I paid for everything. If I couldn't afford it, I couldn't have it. So no music lessons. So I had to pick up an instrument and I had to learn how to use it on my own. And back in those days, there was no internet. There was only libraries, and libraries didn't always have everything you needed to teach you what you wanted. So it's by trial and error. And one thing that I always had, because I learned to tap when I was 6 years old, was a great sense of timing. So I incorporated that sense of timing to the way I do music. So my music is more acoustic based, percussion based than anything else. There's a lot of percussion in my music. Even if it's of keys, it's percussion keys. If it's a guitar, it sounds like percussion. It's got that little to it. It's all about having that
Yeah.
zing. And I learned that by being a guy who didn't have the money to have the best equipment. And somebody else would have a Stratocaster, I'd have a Ghetto Caster and be happy I had that Ghetto Caster. And be looking at that Ghetto Caster like, man, it's the best thing in the world. It's my Ghetto Caster. Somebody else had a brand new keyboard. Well, I could go look at that keyboard at the store. I could go in there and play on that keyboard. People go, oh, that boy played that keyboard. But I couldn't take that keyboard home because I couldn't afford it.
What was the first instrument that you learned?
First instrument I learned was timbales. And I still have timbales here because timbales are a Latin drum kit. Okay, so you see usually two drums together, and there's a high tinny sound. You hear it in Latin music, and it's like that's how I learned because I couldn't afford a drum set, but I could afford some timbales. I think at the time I spent, and this was a lot of money, $125 back in the day. And oh man, I saved a long time for that $125 to get those timbales and those sticks. And I used to drive my dad crazy. Boy, if you don't get out of that house with all that noise, which was great because he drove me to the garage. And because I had to go to the garage, I had to learn how to do soundproofing. And that soundproofing that I learned how to do became an integral part of how I became the guy that I am because people would come to me, hey, Lee, need a room built. Lee, I need some advice on a room. Thanks to my dad kicking me out of the house and making me go in there. And he said, boy, I better not be hearing all those drums. And he wasn't kidding either. So I had to make the room so he wouldn't hear it. So I learned through most things I learned through pressure or force to do it. So from there, I learned to play other drums. And then the next thing I learned how to play was another cheap instrument, a harmonica, because anybody can pick up a harmonica. So I learned to play like E and A, and then I got a chromatic. And then I started getting into other percussion instruments like slap vibes and things like that. And then finally, my first keyboard that I actually bought, I don't think I had a keyboard until I was 26, 27, so I could afford a real keyboard. No, I don't think I had one before that. Guitars, basses, always bass, because bass is one of the things I love. So if you look back there, you'll see at least 3 or 4 basses that I have back there. I love bass. And I don't play to perform. I'm not a performer. And I tell people that I've hired performers. I've basically performed in the past, and I performed in Germany a lot, and that was fun. But the music I do now outside of film, it's for my own psycho betterment. And music is one of the best things for a shitty day, for a bad day, for any day. So if I'm feeling low, or if I'm feeling confused, I'll pick up an instrument and I'll just jam for about 15 or 20 minutes until my head's straight. Because all those endorphins and everything that are being released, that's my best medicine ever.
Do you compose for films too then, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yep.
Is there...
I do it all.
What film? Are there any films out there that we would have known about?
No, because unless you were anything that I've done would have been in Germany, and unless you are going back to ZDF and going back into the old days, no. The stuff that I do now for composition is for my own stuff. Okay. So if you hear or watch anything that's got music to it, if it's Shed, which could be under a lot of different names, but if it's CZHED, that's me. If you hear that music there, that music is most likely something that I composed.
Why Shed? Where'd that name come from?
Back in 2002, when I was doing this, SEO was a new thing, right? SEO is, search engine optimization. Mm-hmm. So I was originally going to call myself Shed because down south, you practiced and played in the shed. So it's going to be Shed Music. And I thought to myself, if I do call myself Shed Music, where in the world would you find me at on this little old internet? Because it'll be behind Bob's Shed, George's Shed, Shed Supplies, Shed this. So I said, what I need to do is come up with a clever way of spelling it and meaning the same thing. So hence CZHED. And if you were to say that in German, that would be Shed.
Interesting. What led you to Germany?
Let's see, living in Boulder, Colorado, 1984. This was after I stopped working for Joe and was off on my own, and I had my own. I don't. I can't remember the name of the place anymore. It wasn't a place, but it was a business. I was doing consultancy. So if you needed menus done or whatever else, I was the guy who was going to come in, tell you how you could do your restaurant, how you could do your menus, and all the rest of that stuff. Well,
Nice.
people weren't paying their bills because this was about, yeah, 1984. We're about to go through another recession. So at the time, I
Mm.
think I was 26 years old and freaking out. And my dad said, "Hey, you need a break. You know, you're acting like you're a 40-year-old man. Come over here for a week or two." Now, my dad had ulterior motives. My parents never did anything straight up for me. And sure, we understand that. His ulterior motives was that he knew in 6 weeks' time that he was going to be leaving and going back to the States, and that he'd be going back to Mississippi, and he wanted me to go there with him because I'm the business person. So he could do the business, I'd run it for him, yada, yada. That was his plan. But it wasn't my plan. I came over, took a look around, and said, oh, I can get a job as an American over here working for the American government. Within a week and a half, I knew that I could do that. So within a week and a half, I said, hey, Dad, I already called my old roommate back in Boulder, Colorado, told him to, sell my stuff, keep it, settle for rent, whatever. I called my old girlfriend, who I'm still best friends with to this day, and said, okay, this is nothing against you, but I got to get the hell out of Boulder. I got to get someplace better, and I'm in Germany right now. I can breathe the air. People aren't looking at me and having anything more than that's who are you. So Germany allowed me to grow, and unfortunately, the story is there are a lot of Black Americans who get in the military and never come home. They get to Germany, they find out in Germany, yeah, they're Black Americans, but that's not something that's being held against them. They either marry another American or they marry into the German society. They have German kids and they don't ever come home. And my course was going to be the same thing. I had no plans of coming back to America ever. I had a business there. I was about this close to becoming a German citizen because I had uh, done the 7 years of basically having residency and everything. And my mother approached me and said, Lee, you heard your sister was in an accident. Let me tell you how bad it was. It was very bad. She's in the hospital, and we don't know how it's going to happen. So we need you to come home to take care of her children in case, as old people, something happens to us. And so I said to my mom, and don't you have another son right there in Seattle, in fact? Yeah, but he can't do the job, right? Great. So this was my mom's way because she didn't want me in Germany anyway. She's always afraid of me having a half German child. That's another story with my mom. So she always wanted me back home.
Yeah.
So she used this as a leverage tool to get me back to the States.
Huh.
And you can ask anybody that I know, they all know the story. And even before my mother passed, she would tell the story. That's how she got me back here. And believe me, once I got back here, I wanted to bounce and go back because I came from doing what? I was doing A and B testing for a German software firm, right? I couldn't get hired by Microsoft to save my life. To save my life, I couldn't get hired by Microsoft. But ironically speaking, 10 years later or so, working for a contractor, I'm pretty much given the keys to the campus, taking care of Microsoft servers. And when the contractor was getting ready to leave, hey, we'd like you to come in and work for us. No, see, I'm only doing this to make money, to put my computers up so I can do my music. But thank you for offering me the opportunity to do that. And really, back in those days, Microsoft was it was an ownership thing. You really worked hard and you took pride in what you did. It was a different environment. And I would never go to the new Microsoft. It's not the old Microsoft.
Yeah.
But even though Microsoft is cool, back in those days, they weren't hiring people of color.
Hmm.
And that, because you would think, wow, this guy just came from Germany, did A and B testing, speaks German, and writes in English, and all the rest of this stuff, got degrees. Why isn't he working at Microsoft? Because it was a question everybody would ask. I said, well, you should ask Microsoft that question because they didn't want to hire me.
Interesting.
That's Seattle.
Huh. What?
But now Microsoft handles outside. Now Microsoft has changed because now Microsoft understands they got to go local. And now almost anywhere in the world, they're hiring, but locally. My whole neighborhood is filled with people from other countries.
Yeah, that's true. There's a huge vast of I'm not going to go down the corporate road, but yes, it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah, sure.
wanted to ask you about, now you've already touched on AI and you literally said it's
Right.
a tool. Are there
Yeah,
any
it's
other
tool.
concerns when it comes to media or film production about AI? Your thoughts on there?
Yeah, a tool is a tool, but remember, a gun is a tool. A knife is a tool. A sword is a tool. I didn't say it was a good or a bad tool. I said it was a tool, and it's really how you wield the tool and what you're going to do with it. If you are skilled and know what you're doing with it, then you can control it. But if you're just pushing buttons and you're using the fuzzy logic of AI to do your work, well, it's learning. And it's not learning what you want it to learn, it's learning what it wants to learn. And pretty soon, who knows, maybe one day your voice is being used by it to do something you didn't want it to do because you didn't know how to control those tools. You got cut by your own knife, so to say.
Yeah.
That's what I look at AI. It's a tool, but like any good tool, you gotta be instructed or intuitive on how to use the tools so you don't hurt yourself or someone else with those tools.
When it comes to film production, what is your favorite tech?
When it comes to film production, my favorite tech is Magic Media's Vegas, because it used to be Sony Vegas, and about 7 years or so ago, the company that used to be my client that I did the initial work for bought Vegas. And so now I'm using the Sony Vegas 20, and I'm about to upgrade to 21. It's got a great AI package on board. It's got great colorization. It's a great package all around. It allows you a lot of flexibility because in Germany, when you buy something like a car, it better work or you're not going to sell a lot of them. So that's why I buy German products. There's no excuse. If it don't work, you're in trouble. So most likely you're going to get a good product, and I do have a good product. And Vega was really buggy when it was run by Sony, really, really buggy. And I wouldn't have touched it with a 10-foot pole. I was back in those days, it was Premiere or something else. But since they've come on board and the German and Swiss programmers have done their little magic to it, this is truly a very good program. And I suggest that it may be a little bit harder to learn. It's not as easy as Premiere.
Yeah.
But once you know it, you can do so many more things with it than you can do with Premiere and any of the other ones. Outside of maybe like Sequoia, if you're going to go on the super high end.
So you're naming things I've never heard of. I've never used Sony Vegas, and
Okay.
I've never heard of Sequoia. I'll look into it.
Well, Sequoia is what your TV stations are using.
Okay.
That's the high-end package. They're using Sequoia. And that's also by the same manufacturer, Magic Media, who has Vegas, because back in the day, that's what I was A/B and testing the sample too and all the rest of that stuff back in 88, 89, 90 when it first came out for IBM 286s, 386s, and 486s. Yeah.
So is Magic Media the company you worked for in Germany?
Yep, it sure is.
Okay. I was trying to connect the dots here.
And I didn't work for them. They were my client.
They were your client. Okay. But you were doing
They were my
testing for
client.
them.
That's right. And I did their translations for their video and for their audio packages.
How did you learn German?
Well, if you live in Germany 14 years
Just-
and you go to school, no, and Germans think that. Germans think that if you live there for a long time, you learn the language. That's bogus. I can introduce you to a lot of Americans who lived there their whole life and can't speak a word of German. No, I learned German the best way to do it. I went to the Goethe Institute, which is the language guardian of German, and I got their highest education, their große Diplomsprach, which is now a C4 or C3. They reclassified it. But I got that, which means I can go anywhere and teach at a college or high school, teach
Wow.
German, and go to a German university. My writing sucks now because I haven't written German in years, but I still read, and I watch German TV every day. And sometimes if I'm forgetting what I'm trying to say, I'll reach for German before I'll reach for English.
Interesting. Wow. Well, your story about Germany is pretty fascinating to me because I think, my parents got divorced when I was young, and my dad
Mhm.
was in the military, and he stayed.
Right.
He went to Germany, and he stayed there for
That's
a while.
right. That's right.
So it's interesting that you're saying that comparison.
No, even if you're Caucasian, I tell people this time, oh, but what? It doesn't matter. I see Caucasians, blacks, Asians. If they're in the military and they go to Germany, they get a different feeling. Your skin color does not get in. If you're an American, that's sort of like the past. I don't know about everybody else. I can only speak as an American. So if you're an American, your skin color does not get in your way. Your passport is your privilege. And that blue passport in Germany, maybe not anymore, but it was when I was there, was your privilege. And so it was easy for me to make the transition into the German economy. And the best way to do that, you can either do it one of two ways. You get a sponsorship. So that's why McDonald's always has a lot of people working for them because they're sponsoring people. Ha ha ha. Or you start a business, which is what I did. I started my music business and a record label and everything there. And worked in worked in the industry. Again, as I said, I had no intentions of coming home. My home was going to be Germany. I was going to marry German, live German, and do like everybody else and hang out with my friends on a Sunday. Yeah, Americans do that. I mean,
Yeah.
Americans have their flag football games, their barbecues. They just hang out because they're military people.
All
And
right.
if you're military or a military brat, it's a whole different mindset about travel and about what home is. Home is in your heart, not where you're living.
Yes.
Or you couldn't be successful in the military if it was only at home. It had to be in your heart
Yeah.
for you able to do your job. So I've lived that life, and so I'm comfortable wherever I go.
That's awesome. I think that's good.
Mhm.
You've lived a wealth of experience, and I think with experience comes hopefully wisdom, and it sounds like you have that.
I would
So
hope so.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the Asian aspect of life, which is if you live long enough and you're successful in living long enough, you should be able to impart to people some of the things you've learned. But I'm going to tell you, I meet a lot of people my age, and I can tell you that's not everybody.
Right.
Some folks, some folks get there, and that's what they do. They just get there,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Let me tell you about
They
my
just get there.
problems. Yeah.
I'm 70 years old,
Yeah.
and I took my whole life to get here. Did you learn anything? Nope, but I'm here. There you
I
go.
made it. Yep.
Yeah,
Uh,
I made it.
Lee, we are going to be docking the ship of the interview, but first I want to ask you, is there anything that you are working on right now or in the near future that you want people to know?
I want people to keep an eye out for Sample Seattle. Even though we had a big setback because of our internet issues, and anyone can go online and see the film on that, I don't have to go into that. We are pushing forward. We're going to try to reformat. We're going to be looking to do some practice shows locally in the Seattle area in the wine country. We'll be looking to do it there. And we're hoping to, at sometime in the next 2 months or so, to do a practice show in a place called Leavenworth, Washington. I'll probably be reaching out to them because of my land and business up there. I'm part of the of course I am. I'm part of the Chamber of Commerce, and I have to brag. I'm one of five people on the Chamber of Commerce who can actually speak German.
Oh,
But yeah, it's a nice German town, but nobody's speaking the
right,
language.
right.
But thanks to the people and on I have to say that there's a group up there, their buy-in group up there, and they are trying to bring and they are bringing German language back into the schools, which it needs to be in, especially in a place that's touting itself to be a German village. So there
Yeah.
there there are people out there working to do stuff, and I say this all the time: don't look for the large groups because you won't find them. Look for the hardy individuals doing stuff because that's how it works in Washington State. Everything here is organic. If it's not done organic, it's not done at all.
So you're basically, when you say organic, not utilizing businesses versus
Well,
organically
no, you could, but what I'm
networking.
saying is the structure, the structure in place in Seattle. If it were a great structure, then you would already not be hearing me say all these things I'm saying, and you wouldn't hear other people saying it either.
Yeah.
If it were a great structure, it would be working for the people that structure is supposed to be working for. It is not. So people have to be organic. For instance, really quickly, we had one of the best places on the West Coast for art. It was called 619 Western Avenue. We lost that because when they tore down the viaduct, they had to retrofit the building. And when they retrofit the building, of course, they found a way to kick all the artists out. And now those places are $1 million loss.
Wow.
But prior to that, it was the largest artist colony on the West Coast with over 250 artists and residents. And you would find me on the fifth floor with my friend Ed Cox, and that's where I got famous. People would, hey, Lee's on the fifth floor. We would have food, we would have live music, all everything. We people from Japan, Australia would come in and drop in. As soon as the city was going to help us out after that place closed, where's the help? It didn't help. It destroyed the scene. Seattle had a burgeoning comedy scene, one of the best in. Did the city help? No, it died. Every time the city tries to do something, it's a death knell because they don't know what they're doing. They're not intuitive, and they don't really care enough to be intuitive to help.
Yeah.
Reactive is great if you've got a bad foot, but proactive is how you want to go if you want to help people.
Exactly. Lee, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
The best way for people to reach me is at info@sample, all lowercase, hyphen, Seattle, all lowercase.com.
Awesome. All right, we'll post that in the show notes as well. And Lee Dancy, thank you for coming on to the Downing Cut. I appreciate
Uh,
it.
Joe Downing, and your cut has been excellent, and I don't feel like I've been sliced at all. Thank you.
Just wait for the Lee cut to come out next.
Ah!